Should a city government have seized a church for feeding the homeless? Was the OceanGate tragedy a comeuppance for billionaires? And should Robert F. Kennedy Jr. debate Jon Stewart on vaccines? We look at these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through our social media feeds, we find any posts that we find noteworthy, and we take them apart, either extolling their virtues or critiquing their flaws. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host Britt. Before we get started, just a reminder to follow us on socials, like and share, subscribe, and our Instagram is Good Take, Bad Take Pod. Our Twitter and YouTube are Good Bad Take Pod. Without further ado, we'll get into the first take here. And this one, someone is quoting Steve Bannon here, and then there's a reply to that quote. So Steve Bannon says, Turner and Massey, referring to congressmen, are not a part of this movement. They are controlled opposition. Got to go. If you're serious about saving your country, they've got to go. Steve Bannon. And then a reply, I concluded Representative Thomas Massey was controlled opposition when he endorsed condeswampus, which so a lot of like stupid lingo there you have to get through. Of course, condeswampus being Ron DeSantis, Thomas Massey had endorsed him. And this is directly in response to about a week or so ago when the House was voting to censure Adam, what's his name? Is Adam Schiff. Yeah, I always get him mixed up with Adam Smith because we have.
No. It was Adam Kinzinger. Sorry.
No. This is Schiff. This is Schiff. You are correct.
Oh.
Yep. Because of his investigation, and the thing was that this particular bill that was going to censure him was also going to make him pay back money that allegedly the taxpayers paid for like the investigation that he orchestrated on Trump, I believe, and stuff like that. And so Thomas Massey's point in voting against this was there's nowhere in here that says, you know, this comes from like his paycheck. This could be personal money owed, and this sets a terrible precedent of, you know, fining congressmen based on, you know, basically taking their money because of political dissidents to whoever controls the chamber. So that was his reason, and the MAGA movement through Steve Bannon is saying that he's got to go because of this. What's your take on this and the second tweet that he's controlled opposition?
Yeah, controlled opposition. This kind of reminds me of when they were trying to pass the CARES Act and none of them wanted to come in to actually be registered on the vote for it because they were scared of COVID and all this stuff. You know, the biggest spending bill in the history of our country, and none of them wanted to be on the record for it. Imagine that. And Thomas Massey decided to show up and try and force everyone to come in to take a vote. And he talked about how he got a call from, I think like the number is 0 or something like that, which means it's Trump calling. And he said, yeah, Trump got on the phone and was basically lambasting me about all this stuff and then called me a third-rate congressperson or whatever. And so, you know, Thomas Massey has principles, right? Which is what makes him awesome, which makes it really silly to use the word controlled, right? Because if he was controlled opposition, you would think he would probably line up, you know, pretty uniformly with a certain set of, you know, voting records and things that he would do. So that's just, you know, really silly on its face. He votes based on his principles. I think his principle, you know, with this is pretty consistent, right? It's like the weapons and tools that we use to bludgeon our opponents. We must be careful about which ones we allow to be used because someday they might be turned on us. And the Republicans and the Democrats never seem to learn this, right? Like they seem to think that when they are in power, they will always be in power. And so let's pass all the tools and weapons that we can use to maintain power. Very similar thing, you know, with the, you know, when the Democrats were doing stuff with appointing judges and things like that. And then Mitch McConnell's like, hey, you're going to regret, you know, a lot of things that you're doing right here because we're going to flip it on you and make it really easy for us to just push through our folks later. And, you know, the Republicans yielded, 3 or 4 new justices during Trump's term. So, you know, Thomas Massey is great from our perspective. I can understand from the MAGA perspective why they wouldn't like him, because the MAGA perspective is very much like whatever Trump wants is what should happen. for good or for bad or for indifferent. Most of the time, indifferent to his constituents and the people that support him the most.
Yeah, I think that you're right in that controlled opposition is like the dumbest term for it to be. Like if I'm in his perspective and I really think that somehow setting this precedent of fining congressmen their personal money or at least opening the gateway to that isn't going to backfire and somehow this is the most brilliant tactical move. At worst, Thomas Massey would be a useful idiot, not controlled
Yeah.
opposition. That's a very stupid term for him because like you pointed out, he does things that are unpopular, not to curry favor with you see and see that's the difference to me in many ways with controlled opposition. So you look at like what I would view as controlled opposition are more of the mainstream Republicans like your Mitt Romneys, your John McCain's, your the people who say like John McCain, he says he's a maverick, but really he's only a maverick when there's so much, like it's only culturally popular that he's going to fund or there's financial interest to fund a war or he's going to be, in favor of some like, well, I'm not going to go too extreme in opposing some government program, right? That to me is controlled opposition saying, oh, I'm for free markets, but that's controlled opposition. What Thomas Massey is, you may disagree with it. You may say, hey, he's making it so we're going to lose every time. We're not going to get this victory. But that's not controlled opposition. And so, of course, endorsing Ron DeSantis is not indication of that either. If anything, the controlled opposition are all of the people in the conservative Republican Party right now who want Donald Trump to win because Donald Trump loses to Biden in every poll. So if you think about it, the people who are most likely to be quote unquote controlled opposition are people who in the Republican Party who are trying to get Trump to win because that's the easiest path for Democrats to take office. If you want to look about it in terms of that, but broadly speaking, Thomas Massey's point here is absolutely correct as you highlight, and it is just bafflingly stupid to think that this won't get used against Republicans and in more punitive ways. Um, Even if you're setting up some kind of precedent with the most noble intentions, like, oh, we're not going to make Adam Schiff pay for it personally. We're not going to drive him into debt. We're doing this because he wasted taxpayer dollars in this scheme that was complete political hackery or whatever. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Don't open the door to let your enemies do the same thing to you without any of those justifications. There's nothing in passing that resolution which, hinges on the fact that one, it has to be a waste of taxpayer money in X defined ways. Two, it has to be safeguarded under these presets. There's none of that. And there was a version to censure him later that would have included, I don't remember if it was guardrails or like removed the fine aspect of it. And Thomas Massey said, yeah, I'm going to support that version.
Yep.
So again, it's not about whether or not he thinks that was the right thing. Obviously, he doesn't think that Adam Schiff was doing the right thing. He's not on Adam Schiff's side here. The problem is he's the canary in the coal mine, and he's going to say this is going to get used against you if we're not careful.
Well, and the principles that undergird all of Thomas Massey's positions and all of his movements and voting record and everything is that the government should be smaller, even
Yeah,
potentially to the point of zero, right? And so this everything that he votes for, and that's what the Republicans are supposed to be, right? Like I remember
right.
when I asked my parents, like, well, why are we voting for George W. Bush instead of, Al Gore? And or what's the difference between Republicans and Democrats? Like, aren't we a democracy? Isn't Democrats good? My parents were awesome because they're like, no, like Republicans are generally in favor of, reducing the size of government and Democrats want to increase it. And then they explained why, you want smaller government and all these things. Obviously, at the time, George W. Bush maybe seemed like that, and then he obviously became
He
the
he
biggest
talked a
governor.
great game.
Oh, he did, and
Wonderful campaign in 2000 as far as limited government people would be concerned. Yeah,
then continuing on the new record with every new president of expanding the government, he did that. So, um, so Republicans talk that, but as you were saying, the Mitt Romneys and the John McCain's and the George W. Bushes, but they do the exact opposite of that, which that's controlled opposition, right?
yep.
It's making people think that they can vote for a certain type of person because they espouse with their mouths one type of view, and then turn around and do the complete opposite that the opposition wants them to do. Thomas Massey does not do that. He's the exact opposite of that. He has principles and he lives up to them and he votes with them, and he does a really great job, on Twitter and in other places, laying out why he is voting for or not for certain types of things. So Steve Bannon and all those guys, they have the same issue that all statists have, which is at the crux of their moral philosophy is that the only thing that matters is power. And if you have it, then you're winning and you're good. If you don't have it, then you're wrong. Even though they criticize, the Marxists and the left that they're Marxists and they have no, moral framework. It's like, well, no, like this shows, right? Like you are piling onto a guy that is objecting to your actions from a moral standpoint, from a principled standpoint. It just shows that their belief truly is, that the only thing that matters is power.
Absolutely right. All right, and our next post here comes from Spike Cohen. Well, he's giving sort of the background situation, and then there's a reply to him. So I'll read most of Spike's tweet here. There's a little bit at the bottom I cut off just for the sake of time. But in his tweet, he reads, "This scene happens every day. Every single day, Pastor Moses and members of his congregation feed people in need. When I was there Saturday, we fed several dozen folks. According to the city of Gastonia government, this is dangerous criminal activity. So dangerous and criminal that they must shut down this ministry and seize the church. That's right.
Wow.
The city government will steal a church to keep homeless people from being fed. And tomorrow, we are going to their city council meeting so they can hear from the people they want to put out on the street. If you can, come join us at the Gaston County City County Courthouse starting at 5 p.m. We demand respect for Pastor Moses and those he is helping." And then and then there is this absolutely incredible reply. Reads, "Clearly someone who has never worked in the food industry. Not saying it makes sense or that it's ethically right, but foodborne illness is no joke. And if you simply don't know if it was prepared correctly, how would it be if all those homeless died from foodborne illness?" What do you take, or what's your take on that second take there, Britt?
That's a terrible take. It's a terrible take. Like, do you think that the food that is being lovingly prepared by a church and people that voluntarily want to do good for other people, is like is going to be like worse off than some food that is prepared by some government shelter with people that don't really want to be there or only show up for the paycheck? And like the whole concept of like, yeah, to quote our friend Larry, who was running for governor of New York, the apocalypse that these people are all talking about is already here today, right? Like people already get sick from foodborne illness. Chipotle, one of the largest fast food restaurants in the country, even in the world, and by some metrics, had people die from, E. coli that was in their lettuce, right? And they are heavily regulated. They try to conform to every single standard in every single state. They have set out procedures and everything, standardized restaurants, all that stuff. And it still happens with all the regulations still there. So, you're never going to, I saw someone make a quote about, I can't remember exactly what it was on. I think it was about like cars, actually. It's like, look, I can make a car safer, but I can't make it safe, right? The government, and that's the case with any private or person trying to make something, whether it's food or the car that you drive in or some medical device. Like you can always make something safer, but you can never make it 100% safe. In the case of the government, I mean, they don't actually make anything safe or safer. Even though they claim, like, if you get this food stamp, in here we have in King County in Washington State, every business is supposed to display their, the grade they got from the food inspectors, right? And the food inspectors will make a random stop. Sometimes they'll schedule a stop. The problem is that's not continuous monitoring of the quality of food handling that an establishment actually does on a day-to-day basis. And so there's been plenty of times I felt sick or gotten sick from something from a place that had an excellent rating and then been totally fine with something that made a good rating. They just had a bad day or they had some sort of they made the inspector get really grumpy, the day that he visited. And that's how that works with all of these different types of regulations. Like they're not actually there to keep you safe or to make things safer. They're there just so that the government can say, well, if we know how it's supposed to be done right, and we are the gold standard for that, and if you guys step outside of that, or if you make the inspector grumpy, we're going to fine you really heavily. So it's just a power trip. That's what all this is for that city. They want to make sure they want to make sure they're not going to be rendered useless and irrelevant, because if a nonprofit can feed these people better than the government can, then what is the point of the government existing in the first place?
That your tail end here, it sounds a lot like the speech that Spike gave. I highly recommend anyone
Nice.
look that up. It is brutal, how he just digs into them. It's absolutely lovely. Um, but yeah, I that you're absolutely right. And let's look at the reality, right? The what's happening on the ground right now is infinitely worse than the hypothetical outcome that hasn't even happened that this person is suggesting. If foodborne illness gets out, yes, that's tragic and terrible. It's almost like those people would be sick and like out helpless, having nowhere to go like they currently are. Like in the current status quo, you are not only temporarily pausing this activity, which frankly, like, I don't agree with the action, but it would be a lot more reasonable to say, hey, let's, you know, you're doing good. Let's really quickly run through permits, a lot, make sure that people get what they need to do in order for it to, be adequate, and then we'll get you back set up. No, they're seizing the church. They're stopping the activity entirely. The response is completely disproportionate to the quote unquote crime being committed. So that to me alone should highlight to everyone that it's not about keeping people safe. It's not about actually caring for the homeless people. It's all about the control. And so this person who's saying, "Well, actually, what about foodborne illness?" You're carrying water for the people who are seizing a church for feeding homeless people. Like, stop trying to justify their behavior. Don't do that. You can come up with a reason why something might be reasonable, but frankly, in this scenario, it does not warrant it. If it was a matter of them being super concerned about safety standards, the government should say, "Hey, we love what you're doing. Let's help get
Yes.
everyone here with permits. Let's fast track that so we can keep on doing that and make sure that we're, doing things responsibly." And frankly, that's, what great organizations do is they look at other people who are doing things successfully. They either try to do it better and provide more outlets, or they come alongside those organizations and say, "Hey, we think we can offer you help. We can give you a place. We can give you training." We That is what, an ideal quote unquote good government would be, is providing support to citizens who are doing good and helping. That's not what the government's doing here. So yes, you're saying clearly you've never worked in the food industry. Um, Instead of carrying the water for the people who are shutting down a government, maybe say, yeah, this is really messed up. The government should have helped fast track food passes and make sure that all these people had food, training to make sure it's great. And again, I don't think the government should have the power to tell you to not because you haven't taken their arbitrary training course. But that to me would have shown a government that at least is ostensibly trying to be helpful. In
Yeah.
this case, there's absolutely no excuse.
Yeah, the role of the government, if at all, should be to minimize how much it needs to be involved and how much of your money it needs to take to take care of the people that can't take care of themselves within our societies and our communities. Like, that's kind of a minarchist, maybe a little bit more than a minarchist kind of point of view. And I think a lot of Republicans would also hold that view. So it's like, from that standpoint, the government should be looking on this and being like, wow, this is awesome. The biggest cost of providing food to people is actually the labor. So let's figure out how to provide them the right type of equipment. It's a one-time capital cost. You can almost look at it like an investment, right? An investment in labor savings at the different types of food places that the government has to hire people to come work at to provide food. Like, let's do a one-time capital investment in the proper types of equipment, the proper types of infrastructure, so that this church, who is voluntarily serving these people with no pay, and no cost of goods to the government, can properly do it, or even do it more efficiently so they can. But no, that's not the case. As you were saying, like, they are scared of being put out of a job. And what's so funny about the government is, in a normal business, right? If there's two people that work in like graphic design at a marketing company or something like that, like, and there's going to be cuts, it's like, well, there's redundancy here, right? Like, I'm a little bit nervous that that because there's two of us graphics people, one of us is going to get cut, and they're going to determine that. So maybe I need to expand my skill set into something else. The problem with the government is that they hypothetically own all skill sets, and all skill sets compete with them, right? They want to be the service provider for every single thing. You think about Barack Obama talking about, I think it was like Julia, like the girl raised basically by the state.
Yeah.
From cradle to grave, they want to be everything. And so anything that you do that is beneficial, profitable, efficient, or good, they will implicitly view as a threat to their ability to get funding and to maintain their power. And that kind of highlights, the core problem with any sort of state that kind of goes beyond the individual.
Yeah. If you think about it in terms of businesses, most businesses that solve a problem, the way that they don't just continue the perverse incentive of breaking your stuff so that they can then fix the problem again is by feedback, is by voluntary people choosing to come to them again, getting good reviews, those kinds of things. The government doesn't have that check, at least not in real time. It can through elections. And fortunately, a lot of the times, especially in local cases like with school boards and things, those elections do have consequences, but it's a much bigger barrier for them to be removed from power than the private market. And so the best businesses are the ones that solve your problem and then provide you more benefit. Either they solve it perfectly, efficiently, quickly, and affordably, or they do all that and they provide you a long lasting benefit for another reason why you would want to keep using them. They want to make sure that you would choose them again if you have a problem, and they don't want to create problems for you, otherwise you're going to go somewhere else. The government, however, doesn't have that same level of accountability, and so for them the incentive is, oh, we just need you to rely on us so we get more funding, because when we fail, we say this program's failing because it's underfunded, and so
Yeah.
everyone gets more money. Okay, our next take here is a quote from Plato that I saw in response to some of the current events going on. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about. The Plato quote is, one of the penalties for refusing to participate in politics is that you end up being governed by your inferiors." What do you think about that, Britt? Because there's a lot of agorists who sort of say any participation in politics is illegitimate and immoral. There are some people who are uh, of our faith persuasion who would say that, oh, we shouldn't involve ourselves in civil politics. And then there's this kind of quote. So what is your take on this?
Well, I think probably my perception of this take hinges upon, one, Plato's, and then two, whoever's using it, their their understanding of what participate means in politics. If I was to say like the good version of this take, I think probably the base level of this is a bad take, but the good version of it, which is like participate means to be aware of what is going on, to have an informed view about how things in basic economics work, and to have a principled stance upon which you stand and can communicate and debate upon. I think this is good, right? Like one of the things that is most unfortunate, with the past 8 years, has been people who have no concept about like government power, how it encroaches, concept of the Federal Reserve, how it's used to devalue the currency and used to fund immoral things, as well as like the lack of thinking through potential consequences for certain actions that are taken, not having a long enough time horizon to evaluate like, hey, let's print $6 trillion, to make everything awesome, or let's shut down the country for 15 days, 30 days, 60 days, 365 days, 2 years. People don't think through that. And I think when people are not participating in that way, which means to be, aware and willing to, have conversations about it, and willing to challenge people in a friendly way, in a way that doesn't like blow up a friendship, but in a way that tries to seek truth. When people aren't doing that, then yes, we will be governed by people who are inferior to us. We will be governed by people, I shouldn't even say governed. People who are inferior and that just want power and are not impressive will become elite through, just our basic ignorance. But I do not believe in the leveraging of like political power where 51% gets to tell the other 49% how to live. I think that intrinsically is immoral and wrong. But yeah, I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm not sure of the full context here necessarily, so I don't know that what he's saying here is even that wrong. I think it's one of those things where we talk about moral culpability, and we talk about real world consequence, and I think that there's a bunch of different divisions of how that manifests. But I think at the very basic level, what he's saying here is correct. I think he's saying, if you're burying your head in the sand, if you say you aren't going to engage with this, then the only people who are going to engage with it are necessarily going to be the people who you don't want, right? If you're
Mm,
saying that,
that's fair.
the enlightened route here is to not involve yourself in politics, then everyone who's enlightened will not involve themselves in politics, right?
Yeah.
And so and so to me, I think that there's a balance, because on the one hand, I don't believe in the idea of the lesser of two evils in every single scenario, because I think that the lesser of two evils gets used to justify voting and supporting for bad people. And I don't think that you have a moral excuse for that, because of, the like, oh well, this guy's only, 49% bad, this guy's 50% bad, we have to vote for the one guy who's only going to give us 49 lashes, when there are other legitimate means to engage. I think, however, there is an argument to be said that if you have a choice of lesser of two evils, and your third, and instead of choosing not even a lesser of evil, choosing a way to engage that is productive, but you just choose to ignore it and bury your head in the sand, well, then the reality is that you're going to have the worst people in power, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's kind of like, I don't buy the idea that just because there's, like a Republican or a Democrat has to win, you shouldn't vote Libertarian. I think in many cases, if the Republican is just as bad, then you ought to. And you ought to get everyone you can, because that is a legitimate means of participation. But I also think that if there's a Republican and a Democrat, and let's say it's a closed election, there's only those two, and you refuse to vote, um, and then the Democrat, or let's say the Republican in this case, gets in, and who's substantially worse on like civil liberties, then you're going to be invaded. You're going to lose your privacy, because the Republican did all that when the Democrat was promising to leave you alone in that way. So I think that it's not a principle that you can take broadly and then apply in the same way in every situation. But I think it's a reality that we have to keep in mind as we engage, and rather than just sort of give up and think, ugh, this is too much, I just want to live on my own and live off the grid, which is great and awesome, but also recognize that if you do that too much and you refuse to participate in the very real systems that are set up in our current reality, eventually your private property is going to get invaded by the
Yeah.
feds.
Yeah. I'll have to go figure out where this quote came from and read the broader context of it.
Yeah, yeah,
I've
I
seen it
agree.
thrown around quite a bit. Just it reminds me of J.R.R. Tolkien's quote, which is, governing other people is the least suitable job for men, but unfortunately, the least suitable people want that job.
Yeah, yes,
So,
exactly.
to quote him loosely, that's not the exact quote, but
Yeah, well, I think that's maybe the enlightened version of it. I think that's the ideal, better version.
yeah,
Okay, we'll move on to our next take. This one is from Twitter user, referring to, of course, the tragic news of the, I can't remember the name of the company, but the submarine that went to go do the tours of the
Ocean Gate.
Titanic. OceanGate, thank you. So the tweet reads: dying in an ocean as deep as your pockets, in a vessel as tiny as the shanty houses you turned your noses up at, in a darkness as expansive as your ego, going to see the final resting place of the souls whom you disturbed with your curiosity, but they still eagerly welcomed you. What do you think about this gem?
It's I mean, the prose of it is just awful. I saw everyone like saying, "Wow, this deserves to be in the book." It's like, no. But two, this is the classic, like, and I've seen this a lot with the submarine stuff. Classic midwit take, which is like, oh, some billionaires went down and tried to explore and they died. Like, they could have used all that money to save, people that were poor, or try to come across the ocean or anything like that. It's just, control C, control V paste this view without looking into who any of the people are. Like, they could not name who the people on the sub are. They just know that they're billionaires, right? And if you look into who these folks are, you realize that these people have given more wealth than you or I could ever hope to even earn in our lifetime. To, as this person says, the tiny shanty houses they turn their noses up. It's like, lady, like, how many dollars have you given to solve the problem of shanty houses in the third world? Because I guarantee you, it is much less than even the smallest fraction of a percentage point that Hamish Harding and some of these other guys have donated. You know, regardless of what you think about the engineering processes for this, and there's a lot to be said for that. The greatest things that have occurred, human achievements, have been taken with risk by people that had a lot to lose, right? Like, all of these guys had billions of dollars, could have easily sat back, just collected interest on whatever investments they've got, and not tried to push the envelope. But the fact of the matter is that, OceanGate and Stockton Rush, the guy who invented or was part of the engineering for this sub, very smart dude, contributes a lot to, our current aviation, contributes billions of dollars to arts and different types of engineering schools for underprivileged people and stuff like that. Like, his whole thing with OceanGate was like, hey, I want to fund nonprofit exploration of the ocean through for-profit tours of places like the Titanic, right? Like, that sounds awesome, right? Like, everyone's complaining about, like, well, we don't fund the scientists that want to go, the marine biologists and stuff. And this guy was like, hey, let's find a sustainable way, right? Like, we can simultaneously create better submarines while also funding, research that needs to occur that these people would want to have occur. And that's really amazing. And then you think about the guy, I can't remember his name, but he's from Pakistan, and his son was on there. They've given millions of dollars to solve various types of digestive issues in the third world, to provide housing for people. So, these guys in combination, billions of dollars of charity worth of effort, and finances given. And so this is just like, it's like, yeah, this is the cool thing to hate on the submarine people, but like, one, what they were doing was brave but foolish, and a lot of times that line is really thin, right? Like, if you think about Ernest Shackleton going to the edge of the earth, a lot of people called that really foolish, but now we're really grateful and thankful that he did, right? So I think it was, I can't remember who said it, but basically, you're known by your mistakes, right? You're known by the rules that not your mistakes, you're known by the rules that you choose to break, for better or for worse, right? Like, and so if they had pulled this off, it would have been awesome. Everyone would have hailed it. It would have opened up a lot of different revenue streams for people to fund cool new stuff. And but they didn't, and they passed away in the effort of exploration. And on top of that, all the money that they've earned is probably going to go to charity, which is more than this lady will ever be able to earn in her life.
Yeah, I think that, like, this to me reads as someone who's gloating. And that is the ugliest emotion in death, over people who have done nothing wrong to these people. It's not like they were known as Mao or Stalin or Hitler, where it's like these people weren't even, it's not even like they were the Bezos or Elon Musk, the public enemies of people who just hate people because they're successful. Like, they'd never heard of this person had never heard of any of these people before. But just because they know, incidentally, you're going to reduce the value of someone to this one decision, which again isn't necessarily the wrong of most of the people in there. It's not even a moral failing. If anything, it's a moral virtue, as you said, as they were trying to innovate that to create funding in charitable ways. You're going to reduce them to that and to their money. Like,
Yeah.
what kind of devaluing of human life must you do to think about people in that way? That's so tragic. I also think it's that, kind of like what you were alluding to. This highlights that the consequences of innovation often fall on the successful innovators themselves. And it's so easy to be the sort of the couch quarterback saying, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. That was obviously really dumb. I could have seen that coming." But, like, a lot of people said that about all kinds of things, about traveling west, to discover land, about building rocket ships, and all these kinds of things. People, it's so easy when something goes wrong to say, "Oh, I would have done it different. Of course, I told you not." But we need to foster a culture of being proud of innovators and people being bold and daring. Now, I don't think recklessness is smart, and there were probably some things that were pretty darn
Yeah.
reckless on this that should have been addressed, and that's fine. But I would rather your take be, it's really unfortunate they went through this, but God bless their bravery, than oh man, they're so rich, they deserved it. Also, just one little really minor quip I have. Going to the see the final resting place of the souls whom you disturbed with your curiosity. Yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone on the Titanic was also really rich. So if you're complaining about these people being rich, why do you care if their souls are disturbed? But that's obviously neither here nor there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what's kind of crazy to me is just like it's almost like as this person tweets from their iPhone or whatever smart computer device that they have that can fit in their pocket, you know, like we want to go backwards. Like there, like you're talking about, uh, there is a heart of just like bitterness and grumpiness, and people just despise people who are creating things, creating new things. And one of my favorite things that, in our conversations that's stuck with me for the years that we've talked about politics and stuff is that the people who benefited the most from plumbing being invented were not the rich people. I mean, it was invented for the rich people initially, but the people who most greatly benefited from it in the long run were poor people, right? Like, it used to be that if you needed to use the bathroom, you had to go either do it somewhere that you were going to see and potentially experience the waste in some way, or you had to figure out how to get outside and walk a long ways away. So you had to make that trade-off if you were not one of the richest of the rich. If you were really rich, then you'd have people, empty your chamber pot and take things out and all that stuff, and then you could dispose of the waste and all that. But with plumbing, now the waste can be carried away from you, and it makes it accessible for people to have the same level of lifestyle that the rich people did for much cheaper. And so that's what all of this innovation does, right? Like, if we had, who knows what the type of you know if they'd pulled this off, they were doing something crazy with carbon fiber to try and make a sub that was really light and really cost effective to go that deep. If they'd pulled it off, then that opens up a whole new level of innovations that benefit people who are less well off, right? If you can open up structural materials and a way of using carbon fiber in a way that is much stronger than it's supposed to be used for, I mean, yeah, that benefits the rich in that moment, but in the long run, it benefits poor people, right? Because now you can have stronger houses for cheaper. You can have stronger materials for cheaper. So that's what innovation does. I also, one of our mutual friends named John has this great point about how, like even if they never donated anything to charity, right? These people who talk about like, oh, we need to tax the rich. It's like, well, the rich are taxed, right? They do pay a tax, and the very fact that they generate so much wealth means that they pay more in taxes than you probably make in your whole life in a single year, right? Like, just the income tax and the capital gains tax alone. And so we should be encouraging people to be successful, encouraging people to generate wealth and to make new things, because we are all better off for it.
Absolutely right. Shout outs to John. All right. Our last take here comes from a Twitter user.
You could say his name. He's like a millennial paid influencer for
Oh,
the
good.
Democrats.
Okay.
Yeah.
Victor Shi,
Yeah.
or if I'm probably saying that right, who tweets, I challenge Robert Kennedy Jr. to go on Jon Stewart's show. I want RFK Jr. to face what real tough questions are like. I want RFK Jr. to sit face to face with Jon Stewart, one of the best interviewers of our time. Jon Stewart will rip RFK Jr. into shreds, and it will be glorious. Same goes for Joe Rogan and Elon Musk. If they're so confident about their claims about the vaccine, surely joining Jon Stewart on his show won't be a problem, right? Time for them to experience what a real smart interviewer is like. All right, what do you think about this take, Britt?
Well, there are two types of interviews that Peter Hotez could do, right? And they're talking obviously about the Peter Hotez, Robert Kennedy Jr. Fiasco, with Peter Hotez not wanting to go on a specific show. There are two shows. Which one do you think the public would benefit more from? The one show where there's an unlimited time limit. The interview has interviewed people from every single discipline for multiple hours at a time. And he's also a comedian. And then the other one, which is just a comedian show hosted by a comedian who will only give you about 5 minutes of time to talk. One of those is Joe Rogan's show. The other one is Jon Stewart's show. So it's just so funny to me. And for those of you who don't get the sarcasm, the show where, you have unlimited time limits is Joe Rogan's show. So it's just so funny to me that they're like, oh no, Peter Hotez should never go on, Joe Rogan, because he shouldn't, he doesn't need to be exposed to that type of interview. No one actually learns anything from that. As if Jon Stewart's show, which is what, I don't know his current show, but Jon Stewart's career has been satire, political commentary, that is actually just him being a comedian and making little funny points and quips and stuff like that. And that's not to say he hasn't had good moments at times, but in general, he can edit these things down. He also has an agenda that is not to just learn what the truth is. And then three, it's the same old news format, which is like, we need to get people on and get them people off, and we're going to get our sound bites. Joe Rogan is just the raw footage for 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours at a time. So like, people can actually see every single part of the context that they want, and that's why he's been so successful. So it's just so funny to me that these people are like, that would turn their nose up at Peter Hotez going on, Joe Rogan's show, or be like, no, he should go on Jon Stewart's show. It's like, oh, it's okay, Victor Shi. Like, I get what you're saying. You just want it to be on home field advantage, where you can edit and censor and make it as uncomfortable as possible, so that your version of what is happening gets through, not what actually is the truth.
Yeah, the funny thing is I'm extremely okay with the idea of him going on
Yeah,
a Jon Stewart show. Like, I like this take more than some of the other takes I've seen, if that makes sense,
sure.
because I've seen some absolutely appalling takes, um where, like, oh, it's such a shame that CBS has aired anything by RFK, or that anyone would even bother. Like, it's such a, like, so yeah. So him saying, I want him to um, come on this show, or John Stewart's show. Good. Well, okay. So that's a start. But I think that the whole premise is totally wrong, which is that RFK doesn't have the facts or knowledge to do it. I think that that's just completely wrong. I don't necessarily agree with RFK on everything, but you can't say that he's not knowledgeable on the subject. You can't say he doesn't know his stuff. He's very, very aware and into it. So I think that, like, as far as RFK is concerned, if you didn't have the selective editing, if you aired it like a Joe Rogan podcast, he'd be perfectly happy to do so. And that's kind of the difference. And I think you're right in that the reason why they all want this, and they don't like the idea of Joe Rogan, is because uh you know you get to actually have these conversations in long form, and that is really the dangerous idea. And that's why you have so many people who are saying, how dare this mainstream corporate outlet air anything by RFK Jr., because their anchors, even if they push back, even if they interrupt, they look really bad and stupid. They can't afford to let someone talk, and so they need someone who will interrupt or cut down edits of. So frankly, I think this is a faulty premise, probably, is what he's tweeting from. But honestly, the take itself, I'm like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. I'm
Yeah,
fine. And if Jon Stewart does rip RFK Jr. into shreds, that's better for all of us
it
if
is.
it's done honestly. And that's what scientific debate should be about.
Yeah, what I dislike about it so much is this underlying like feeling that, like, oh no, Joe Rogan is not the standard of journalism interviews. It's Jon Stewart, like,
Yeah.
it's like, no man, that guy's like, I mean, it wouldn't be too far off the map to say that he is a gotcha journalist, right? Like, I think about the interview he had with that one congressperson, where he basically is like, "Do you know what the number one killer of kids is in the United States?" It's just like, man, you're just bringing stuff out from left field and not actually engaging with the argument. Like, you're using these weird, red herrings and appeals to emotion to make your point and kind of get people tongue tied. Like, that's not actually discovering truth, right? Like, it makes for a fun little clip, because you basically come out of nowhere and you get this person to get speechless, but it's not actually a useful discussion that helps us see all of the different arguments and helps us uncover the truth. And to me, it makes me think that Jon Stewart is not actually interested in the truth, more in his ideology and pushing that. And so that's what makes Joe Rogan's show great. Is he, to quote other people, he's so open minded, his brain is falling out of his head. But he really is. When you listen, like, he even things that he disagrees with, he will ask great follow up questions on. And he'll push back if he needs to, or if he, like, when he doesn't agree with things, but they're always open ended. It very rarely, almost never, gets hostile. I mean, he had Sanjay Gupta the doctor for CNN, which was putting out literally edited photos of him, fake edited photos of him trying to show that he was really, really sick. And he was willing to have that guy on to talk about the COVID vaccine, and everything was super nice to him. So it's like, you won't find a more friendly environment than that. And it just, to me, it shows just how disingenuous, this Victor Shi guy is. It's just like, yeah, you want them on the most unfavorable and unfair and least transparent medium you can, to talk about these things. And what's crazy is RFK Jr. will still go do it, right? Like, he would go on Jon Stewart's show. He goes on all the mainstream shows. I can't remember the show that he was on, but they literally censored out, a large portion segment of him talking about vaccines, saying like, we just didn't want to expose you to that misinformation.
Like,
It's
you're
like,
so stupid you couldn't handle
yeah,
it.
you couldn't handle it. It's like, well, he still goes on those shows anyways. Like, and he
Yeah.
does a great job, and no one has been able to get a good clip of him yet. They have to cut it out because he's so good at what he does. So yeah, I would love it if you went on Jon Stewart's show, but that doesn't mean it's a good medium for it.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is Jon Stewart, I feel two ways about him because on the one hand, I don't think he is as he's not as in it as many of the mainstream corporate media journalists are. I do think he is a little bit of an independent soul. And that to me was, I always kind of felt that way, but more and more lately it felt like he was getting less that way. But then during the COVID stuff, he, not right away, but before most people, he did go on Colbert's show and kind of mocked every single person who was talking about the lab leak not being a theory, with his whole rant there. I don't know if you remember that, but
It's
that
pretty
was
funny.
at it was funny, and by maybe libertarian standards or free thinker standards late, but by the rest of the world
Yeah.
standards, that was dangerous to say that then. However, he's not he's not this great, perfectly honest, and he has his own thoughts, but he'll always clear things up guy either. I think of, in particular, when there was the bill that was he was trying to um pass about providing money for victims of 9/11 families and responders. And I remember Rand Paul was opposing certain provisions because they were just adding on money onto this, and he said, and Rand Paul's point was, I think we should fund this, but we can't just keep adding expenses. Let's cut somewhere else to offset this. Super simple. He had amendments for it. And Jon Stewart was not honest about that. He was totally disingenuous, talking about how there were Republicans and Rand Paul who just didn't care about 9/11 victims. He totally appealed to emotion, what did his little, congressional testimony where he play acted like the actor that he really is, because he plays a part on TV. And it was totally not addressing the actual substance and point that was being made. And so I don't think that he is this flawless journalist of integrity, that this person Victor wants to paint him as for his sake here. So, I don't hate Jon Stewart, but he's not this totally independent,
No,
always down to the truth guy. He's an actor in many ways and should be seen as such, in most cases.
I don't have
All
anything
right,
on that.
unless you got anything else. All right, well, we'll wrap this up. Thank you guys for listening, and make sure to share with your friends if you're enjoying. We appreciate that. We'll catch you on the next one.